Hello, high school language arts flex class students. That's such a long title. Every time, every week I come, I'm like, I'm going to say this whole title. And I should just probably say, hello, students. Welcome back to our flex class. We made it to week 10. So I hope things are going well. I do really seriously hope that this is interesting to you. I know you may be taking it because you have to. Maybe your parents signed you up, maybe you need a literature course. So maybe literature is not your favorite, but I hope that I've pointed out some interesting facts. You found maybe some new authors that you like and just s- something interesting in the class. Today, we are talking about poetry, modern poets specifically, but I'm going to do a little bit of going back in time on this. What is poetry? I know, especially in some of my middle school classes, I get to the topic and I have students say, poetry. I don't like poetry. I think if that's right, and you may like poetry, I think for some students, the reason that they don't like poetry is how we're introduced to it the first time. If you're introduced to a type of poetry, it's just like any kind of book. If you're introduced to a type of poetry that you don't like as your first introduction, you kind of get it in your head that like everything is like that. So, you know, the first time in my life I ever ate an egg roll, it was horrible. It was done wrong. I was a young kid and it was not a good egg roll. And for years, I wouldn't even try another egg roll. I was like, I hate egg rolls. And then one day, a lot of friends were out and we were getting snacks. Everybody's like, let's get egg rolls. I was like, okay, I'll try them again, but I don't think I like them. Now I love egg rolls. I think literature is the same way. Sometimes when we're exposed to poetry, middle school, elementary school, and we get some of the Middle English poetry, or maybe you get Shakespeare and you like Shakespeare, or maybe everything you're reading is love poem and you're like, I don't want to do that right now. Poetry, though, is so much more than what we're often exposed to in school. It's just an exploration of yourself. Who are you? The people around you and the world around you. It's language that evokes the senses and the emotions of the readers. So, why do poetry? Because sometimes if we have something that's very important to us and we're trying to make a point, we're trying to get people to understand what we're trying to say, relate to our point of view. Not everybody's going to stop and think about it on an academic level. They're like, yeah, I hear your points, but my points are valid too. Not everybody is going to listen to an academic lecture on it or read an essay on it. But sometimes we see poetry and we're like, that makes me stop and think. And I'm not necessarily saying it's going to change anybody's mind on any topic of anything, but sometimes it helps another person understand that they're not alone, or it gives strength to somebody to stand up and say the same thing that you're saying. It's like, somebody else feels that, somebody else believes that. It can be on any topic. Brian Turner, and is not necessarily somebody I'm going to talk about in a one-on-one on this class, but look up the poet, modern poet Brian Turner. Fought in the Afghanistan war and came back. And there was a lot of people who cannot understand what soldiers have actually faced in a war and the things that they see on a daily basis and what they come home with and the PTSD and the trauma that they've seen. And he writes very intense war poetry, like hard to read, but necessary war poetry. You can read that and you can think, oh, I have never thought about what battle is like from that perspective, from the perspective of a person who has been there. And it's it's very intense. It's very real. It really makes you think. Same things with the civil rights poets. The poets who were standing up for change in a nation that didn't want change. A lot of those people that were on the front lines of the civil rights movement wrote some very deep and intense poetry. to help those of us that were not there understand what it was like and understand those deep emotions that they were facing. I've read poetry on um, climate change, people writing about different ways the earth is changing and how we as humans can maybe step in and bring some positive action to that. And there's been poets from doctors and nurses who face challenges on the front lines, teachers, students, people who are in some intense situations. I read some recently from a student who is a cancer patient and is writing about his journey through childhood facing cancer every day. So there's some really intense emotions that you can put in poetry to help explain it to somebody else, but nothing else, just to put it down for you. Put your thoughts down on paper of what's important to you. That's what poetry is. Poetry actually predates written text. It was originally spoken or sung. Oral stories and oral poems were what carried generational stories, life stories, how to survive stories from ancient times, from one group of people to another, from one generation to the next. So, again, the earliest known poems are hymns or chants. They were kind of like a verbal art. So, there was prayers from different faiths, love songs, historical accounts, instructions, fiction, any of that could be in the form of a poem. Here's an example: the Epic of Gilgamesh, cited as the earliest work of epic poetry, dates back to the 18th century before Common Era. There are Sumerian poems. There's the history of uh, Gilgamesh. Other ancient works include the Vedas, 1500 to 1000 BCE, the Odyssey, 800 to 675 BCE, composed in poetic form. It's done that way because poetry is easier to memorize, and oral transmission eh, is necessary to memorize it. You can't get the details wrong if you want somebody to remember it. So, again, what is a poem? It's just creative writing that uses words and sounds to paint a picture with words for the reader. Helps the reader understand an emotion or feel something, can tell a story for the reader, or become a song for somebody else. I mean, for those of you who like music, it's a sung poem, basically. Kids, poetry are usually introduced to poetry first through nursery rhymes. It's just a poem for kids. Tells the story to children and can be part of a game or a lullaby. I mean, because it has a set beat to it, again, it's easier for the kids. Think about this. If I told you the story, um, there's two kids named Jack and Jill, and they had to go get some water for their family. So they went up a hill to get the water. While they were going up the hill, Jack fell down. He hit his head, broke his crown on the way down, and Jill was so upset that she looked to see what happened and came tumbling after. A kid is going to be like, okay, whatever. You if I had to repeat that back, could you turn around and repeat that back to me quickly, especially if you were younger than you are? No, but this has a beat to it. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Kids can repeat that back because it has a beat. They feel it. They don't just hear it, they feel the beat to it. So here's some examples. This is a goofy. I have 2 books of poetry. All of my poetry is not like this, okay? This is I wrote this very long time ago, and it was in a discussion with some middle school and high school students about where do people go in their careers, academically competing with each other for top grades, valedictorian, then, going on into college and doing research, and this is free verse. That means there is no set pattern to it. There's no rhyme pattern to it. There's not a particular set of syllables or beats in each sentence. I started at the bottom, but then I learned to climb. Along with climbing, I learned to fall, but I learned to get back up. Well, I'm still climbing and learning. My friends say I'll reach the top, but how will I know when I get there? How high is the top? It was kind of just meant to be a philosophical discussion on our goals. When do we know when we really reach a goal? They say he's on the top of his career. What does that really mean? There's always going to be, almost always somebody somewhere that has more money or more titles or more something. When do we what do we define as the top of our goal? When do we define a goal as reached? Now, others, most of my poems, like I said, I have 2 books of poetry. Most of mine are, free verse. Not all of them. Some of them have a set pattern or a rhyme, but mostly mine are free verse. And again, that one was just kind of a goofy one I talked. It's fun. I like that one, but it's not necessarily representative of my other poems. This is an example of rhyme patterns. You put a letter by the words that rhyme. And if another one doesn't rhyme, you change letters when you come to one that doesn't rhyme. So star and R both get A's. Oh, hi, that doesn't rhyme, so now we got to go to B. Sky rhymes with that one, so we put B. You can keep on going. If you look at the top, an alternating rhyme scheme: A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G H G H. That means every other line rhymes, but they don't rhyme with the stanza before it. So like A B A B, if the next one rhymed with that, like if the next one rhymed with star, it would go back to A again. So over here, I don't know when it started. I don't know when rain came, but storms are all I knew, and hurricanes had a name. Like A and C don't rhyme, but the two came and name do, so it's A B C B. So look at this. I don't know if I explained it very well, but I think if you look at this, if you pause this, if you're writing about poetry, this is one of the things that you can write about. What is the rhyme pattern? What is the rhyme scheme of the poem? Okay, what is onomatopoeia? Why am I talking about this? They are sound words that can add depth to your writing, especially poetry. It helps the reader connect using the sense of hearing. So it can be machine sounds: beep, vroom, bong, honk. Animal sounds: meow, moo. Impact sounds: boom, whack, thump. Or just random sounds: shush, giggle, whine. In writing, you put these in italics when they represent a sound. She stopped to listen. Beep, beep, beep. Where is this sound coming from? So it doesn't have to be only in poetry, okay? Graphic novels, comic books, short stories often have these in there. But they can also be very powerful in poetry. And I thought I had an example of one right here, and I didn't. But there are several poems weather poems, when you talk about, we talk about the trip, trip, trip. This is an example. I'm trying to talk about all the different aspects of poetry, give you an overview of all the different things that can be in poetry. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe is an example of almost horror poetry. There's a modern poet who just passed away a couple of years ago, Peter Salomon, who writes amazing horror poetry. I had the honor to sit next to him at a book signing when we were both at the poetry table, and I was expecting his poetry to be somewhat like my poetry. And we looked at each other's books, and it's like, whoa, yours is, yours is horror poetry, and it caught me off guard at first. But it's amazing. I mean, he's not still living. He did pass away a couple of years ago, but he writes brilliant horror poetry if you're into horror movies, horror writing. But the Raven by Edgar Allan Poe has such ominous symbols in it, and tapping. There's some onomatopoeia. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." If you finish reading this, you will see that it is a raven, this bird tapping at his door, and it is there to literally drive him mad. It's about a person in such grief that they're literally losing their mind. So it's a very creepy poem. I personally like it. Go find the rest of it. Look it up. You can probably find it online. Let's look at some quotes about poetry. Audre Lorde, amazing modern writer. Look her up. Look up some of her works. I just, I love her poetry. You can find it online. You find it at the Poetry Foundation or Poets and Writers. There are several poetry sites. Just look up Audre Lorde poetry and you can find some. Poetry is not a luxury, it is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is a way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. That goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Why write poetry? Audre Lorde says it's not a luxury, it's a necessity of who we are. We feel so deeply sometimes. We have such strong convictions about something that either needs to be lifted up or changed. And our emotions can pour out through fiction or through poetry sometimes. It's not through essays always that we can express what we believe in deeply. And Jeanette Winterson, a tough life needs a tough language. And that is what poetry is. That is what literature offers a language powerful enough to say how it is. Poetry doesn't give us a chance to hide. Sometimes think about life. We go through life, we go through hallways, we go through buildings. Hey, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm great. And we just do that all day long. How's everything? Great, great. Class is okay? Yep, great. Poetry is when we need to stop and say, no, everything is not great. There's a lot wrong. There's a lot good in this world, but there's also a lot that needs to be changed. Poetry can be that voice. Here's another one. Dead Poet Society has Robin Williams in it. One of my favorite movies. I was always so glad when my kids were old enough. I watched it separately with each one of them. We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, those are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. Just process that. Read it again on your own. Slow it down, read it again. Before I go into my others, I found a great book, um, Brown Girl Dreaming, Jacqueline Woodson, another amazing modern poet. Look up Jacqueline Woodson. I'll put it right there. It's a memoir of growing up in 1960s and 70s in America. It says award-winning author Jacqueline Woodson shares her childhood growing up as an African American in the 1960s and 1970s. Touching and powerful, her story is both accessible and emotionally charged. Each line a glimpse into a child's soul as she searches for her place in the world. Pick it up. It's a great book. Here's another one of my book finds, Nikita Gill. Let me put her name up there. Another amazing modern poet. Nikita Gill is all over Instagram. You can find Nikita Gill's poetry online. Just Google Nikita Gill. Before we do that, though, before I move into our grammar section, I've got two poetry highlights we're gonna do. Nikki Giovanni. Personally, just one of my favorite Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, there's so many others, but I really have respect for Nikki Giovanni, who is still alive as the recording is taking place. Poet Nikki Giovanni was born in Knoxville, Tennessee on June 7th, 1943. Although she grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, she and her sister returned to Knoxville each summer to visit their grandparents. I keep it real on these videos. I gotta take a sip of water. I don't edit out. I don't edit my videos. I keep them real. People have to get a drink of water. We have to get a drink of water. She and her sister returned to Knoxville each summer to visit their grandparents. Nikki graduated with honors in history from her grandfather's alma mater, Fisk University. Since 1987, she has been on the faculty of Virginia Tech, which again, as this recording, she still is. where she is a university distinguished professor. Here's what the Poetry Foundation has to say about her. A world renowned poet and one of the foremost um, authors of the Black arts movement. Her notable books of poetry are Black Judgment and Those Who Ride the Night Winds, which were influenced by her participation in the Black arts movement and the Black Power movement in the 1960s. Giovanni has published numerous collections of poetry, from her first self published volume, Black Feeling, Black Talk, 1968, to New York Times bestseller Bicycles, Love Poems, 2009. She has written several works of nonfiction and children's literature and made multiple recordings, including the Emmy Award nominated The Nikki Giovanni Poetry Collection. Her most recent publications include Make Me Rain, Poems of Prose, Chasing Utopia, a hybrid, and as an editor, the 100 Best African American Poems in 2010. She's published more than 24 volumes of poetry, essays, and edited anthologies, and 11 illustrated children's books, including Rosa, an award winning biography of Rosa Parks. Nikki Giovanni has received numerous awards, including the 2022 Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, the inaugural Rosa L. Parks Woman of Courage Award, the American Book Award, the Langston Hughes Award, the Virginia Governor's Award for the Arts, the Emily Couric Leadership Award, a Literary Excellence Award. She is a 7-time recipient of the NAACP Image Award. Her autobiography, Gemini, was a finalist for the 1973 National Book Award. In 2004, her album, the Nikki Giovanni Poetry Collection, was a Grammy finalist for the Best Spoken Word Album. Giovanni's work explores race, gender, sexuality, and the African American family. Her poetry was political and worked to uplift the Black experience in the arts and is part of the Black arts movement. Giovanni also dedicated herself to the uplifting of other Black writers, especially Black women writers, such as by editing and publishing Night Comes Softly, an anthology of poetry written by Black women. She also advocates for the right to vote worldwide and supports the right of incarcerated people to vote. She continues to write poetry and recently made headlines for penning a poem titled Vote on the importance of voting. Here's a poem. Now, the title is the way it is, BLK, Black History Month by Nikki Giovanni. If Black History Month is not viable, then wind does not carry the seeds and drop them on fertile ground. Rain does not dampen the land and encourages the seeds to root. Sun does not warm the earth and kiss the seedlings and tell them plain, you're as good as anybody else. You've got a place here too. You can say, oh, these are a simple thought, but it's such depth. There's so much here about, well, just reread it. I don't want to tell you what it's about. I want you to bring your thoughts to these poems. I'm not going to analyze any of these poems, but I love the direction that Nikki Giovanni makes us think. You just stop and just reread it a couple of times, and you will really just feel the depth of what she has to say. Here's a poem on the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. And again, this is how it's written. This is not me typing it goofy. Trees are never felled in summer, not when the fruit is yet to be born, never before the promise is fulfilled, not when their cooling shade has yet to comfort. Yet there are those unheeding of nature, indifferent to ecology, ignorant of need, who, with axe and sharpened saw, would, in boots, step forth damaging, not the tree, where it falls, but those who would, in summer's heat or winter's cold, contemplate the beauty. And I like this one. It's about growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, about time spent visiting. I always like summer best. You can eat fresh corn from Daddy's garden, and okra and greens and cabbage, and lots of barbecue, and buttermilk and homemade ice cream at the church picnic, and listen to gospel music outside at the church homecoming, and go to the mountains with your grandmother and go barefooted and be warm all the time, not only when you go to bed and sleep. Something nostalgic like this is meant to take us back, not necessarily to the same experiences. Your life experiences are most probably very different from Nikki Giovanni's, but it takes us back to images, feelings growing up that we may have in common. It ties us together. It gives us a picture of what Nikki Giovanni's memories from childhood are and can help us tie into those. It's in our own nostalgia. Poet Amanda Gorman. Okay, I am going to see if I can turn on the original sound here and play this. Amanda Gorman, a 22-year-old poet, read an original work at President Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20th. After Biden was sworn in as the nation's 46th president, Gorman read The Hill We Climb, building on a tradition of poets, including Robert Frost, Maya Angelou, Elizabeth Alexander, and Richard Blanco, who have read for incoming Democratic presidents. Gorman is the youngest of these inaugural poets to offer verse. So it doesn't matter what you think about the politics. This is not a political post. This is a poetry post. So listen to the poetry. Let's see if I get this play. If it's going to do it. There we go.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just is, isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Okay, so if that didn't play, look it up and just Google inauguration poem by Amanda Gorman. What I was hoping that it did, I could hear it. I hope you can hear it on your end. Is it's a very hear the emotions. It doesn't truly matter whether you agree with it or not. Remember, the part of poetry is to express Amanda Gorman's passions, thoughts, emotions, and hope that they touch other people. It's not this is not an exercise to see if you agreed or disagreed, to ignore the politics of that. I want you to hear the passion in the poetry is what I'm reaching for. The images in the poetry. That this is so poetry is still so relevant today. Amanda Gorman is the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history, as well as an award-winning writer and cum laude graduate of Harvard, where she studied sociology. She has written for the New York Times and has 3 books forthcoming with Penguin Random House. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she began writing at only a few years of age. Now her words have won invitations to the Obama White House and to perform for Lin-Manuel Miranda, Al Gore, Secretary Hillary Clinton, and many, many others. Look up about Amanda Gorman. I want you to explore Amanda Gorman on your own. I'm not going to put a lot more here because it's new. She's still a writer. Go to her website, look at the covers of her children's books, and just explore. Use this time to explore some modern poetry. Look at Brian Turner. Look up Maya Angelou. Look up Nikki Giovanni. So many, Nikita Gill, Woodson. So many amazing modern poets that are still so relevant today. Grammar section, revising your work. Revising. The first step is different from editing. Revising involves writing and rewriting your content. As the author or manuscript consultant, you're often adding, rearranging, or removing and replacing content in your paper or story. Revising has the big picture in mind. What was your writing goal? So if you're writing a school paper, nonfiction, know your goal. If it's a research paper, prove that you did the research on the topic. If it's a persuasive paper, persuade someone to understand your side, buy your product, vote. Prove you read and understand the book if it's a book review or a book report. Biggest thing is follow the directions of the teachers. Maybe if you were supposed to compare two poems, two paintings, two thoughts, was that your goal? And did you do it? Every type of paper has different goals. If it's comparative, you're comparing. If it's analytical, you're analyzing. If it's persuading, you're persuading. Know what your goal was. When you start to revise, ask yourself, did it? If it's a term paper, a research paper, did you prove that you did the research? That means cite your sources in the paper. Read for content and structure. Does the information in your paper reinforce and relate to your thesis or topic sentence? You have that topic and sentence thesis statement. Did you use it? Is everything in your paper related to that? Does each paragraph flow smoothly and stay on topic? If you have a lot of stuff that's off topic, take it out or move it to the paragraph where it is relevant. Do you have smooth transitions between paragraphs? Sometimes it's just a word. Also, you know, he did this, he also did that. It makes it read smoothly instead of just like a grocery list. Are the thoughts in your sentence clear to the reader? If you're revising fiction, tell, create, be, build, understand. Tell the story from the perspective you chose. Create a flow easy for the reader to follow. Be consistent in tone and style. Build strong characters. Understand reader expectations for your genre. So if you're writing a mystery and you give away the answer at the beginning, the reader's going to be very disappointed because then it just becomes an action book or an analytical book or something. A mystery means the reader doesn't want to know the answer until the end. Just if no matter what your genre is, know the expectations of it. Read as a reader when you're revising. Where are the breakdowns in your work? What needs clarifying? What needs deleting or needs to be added? This is the time for you to read your paper as if you are the teacher and ask yourself if I had not done this research, is it clear? The other day, somebody was writing about a book and they just kept referring to a character and they never said who the character was. I was like, you got to tell us. Is this a kid? Is this an adult? And it can be short. You don't have to give the whole backstory of it if it's not relevant to the paper, but just say something like, as 10-year-old Thomas did this. So that's revising. Slow this down, come back to this right here, and think about this. Know your goal. A lot of times people will turn in a research paper to me and there's no research in it, or at least they don't cite the research in there, or a persuasive paper and they didn't persuade anybody anything. They just wrote about the topic as if not trying to persuade somebody. So know the goal of your paper and ask yourself when you're revising that, do this. Come back here and think about these things. Information in your paper needs to be relevant. If we're talking about the Wright brothers, I don't want, a whole paragraph about somebody else. So take it out if it's not relevant, if it doesn't stick to the topic. If it's relevant, if it's because they were in business together or something, make it clear that it's relative. Maybe that person is important to the Wright brothers, but make it clear in your paper why you're just talking about this person and only give the information that's related to your main topic. Stay on topic with your thesis or outline your paper. When you're revising, look and say, did I live up to my outline? Okay? So you may not be finished with your papers. Totally okay. All right. This is only week 10. You got 2 more weeks, and then you have a week after that to turn them in. But keep this. Remember that you can revise as you go. If you're finished with one whole section, you can revise that if you need a break from the writing. So, does that make sense? Where I hope you are, please, please, please ask questions in the classroom if any of this is not clear. I also really hope that you explore some modern poets. I mean, there's poets about everything. There's people who write poetry about video games and things, whatever, engineering, medicine. You can write poetry about anything. So look up some of your interests. Play around with writing a little bit of poetry if you want to. Send it to me if you do. I hope you're having a good week. And seriously, please ask questions in the classroom. Make posts. I love teaching. So I hope you're getting something out of this. I hope it's interesting. And I'm here not just during the class time. I'm here to answer your questions. All right. All right. See you later.